All right, welcome everybody. We have a new episode of Garza, Gaitan, and the Game, where we go play by play, analyzing the game of politics here on the podcast. Today, we got an interesting show ahead. We're going to be talking about a controversy going around Myrka Dellanos. What is the real merit of what people are saying, and what's the truth behind what she actually said? Daniel's going to be breaking that down for us on the back and forth. We're also going to be looking at the headlines. Venezuela, who had previously said they were not going to take back their own citizens, deportees coming from the United States, has now just said that they will be receiving, they will be opening the gates of the airport for those people coming into the country from the United States. And lastly, a lot of news coming out of Washington, D.C., specifically the Department of Efficiency under Elon Musk saying that they're making significant cuts and recommendations around the Department of Education. We're going to talk about this. What are the pros? What are the cons? What does this mean for states? What does this really mean for students and families? Welcome, Daniel Garza. How's it going?
Things are good. I'm in Washington, just obviously a player in the game here myself. This week, I was attending a policy briefing with a bunch of Latino leaders here at the White House. So it was good to see some old faces and also get into some conversation about the policy that are impacting Americans across the country.
Yeah, awesome stuff. Well, just jump right into it. I mean, let's start with
Yeah.
Myrka Dellanos. I mean, to give a little bit of context here, look, on this podcast, we've been talking a lot about the U.S.-Mexico relations. I mean, when we're talking about decades upon decades of trade, of working together in various aspects. One of them is really combating corruption, drug and human trafficking. There's so much that goes into that history. The reality is we're still living in it today. Now, Myrka Dellanos, who's a host of a show on Telemundo, gave a long sort of dialogue on the current situation that's going on there. In a second, I'm going to ask you if you can go a little bit into that. But the reality is that some people clip just a small, probably 30-second, maybe even less, because it was somewhat of a back and forth, but maybe a 20 to 30-second clip of a small part of what she said. And now, through social media and through even some headlines, they're saying that she said that all Mexicans are criminals.
Yeah.
But Daniel, let's zoom out. You saw the entire segment that she did. What is it that Myrka said, and what is it that people are getting wrong, in any context that's important there?
Yeah, well, as far as context, it is a distortion of what she actually said. I mean, Myrka Dellanos is one of the voices on, I think, on a panel of 4 or 5 ladies, kind of like sort of tantamount to The View that you see on ABC. With she's probably the only center-right voice in the entire show, or in its history, practically. So, she's always the minority view on that show. But, here, she's been receiving some coordinated blowback for allegedly, like you said, saying that all Mexicans are criminals, and that but what she really said was that the Mexican government is tied to the narcos and the cartels. It shouldn't be news to anybody. I mean, give me a break, right? To take an easily provable reality that the cartels have paid off many politicians in Mexico and actually killed a lot of politicians for not taking bribes, by the way, entre parentheses, let me add, that they control entire regions of Mexico, and that they exert fear and intimidation over Mexicans with violence and murder, and to pretend that somehow, Mexico is a nation that is free of all this, I think, is a bit rich. Wadi, just recently they have found extermination camps dotted across Mexico in which people were tortured and disappeared in vats of acid, cut up in pieces. They found these crematoriums in Nuevo León, where my parents are from and where I'm from, in Jalisco, in the center of Mexico, in Tamaulipas. They're killing Mexicans at scale now, right? And folks want to pretend, that to be outraged at the mild charge made by Myrka Dellanos. Por favor, the other thing I'll add is that they found in one site, in the Jalisco site, 300 pairs of discarded shoes. of course, you can draw the connection there because they found also human bones and human remains littered throughout that site. And so, how do you murder at scale like that? How do you disappear so many people and they're barely finding out about this? I mean, are people turning a blind eye? Well, maybe that's exactly what's going on. Anyways, Myrka was saying that what she did was actually she was quoting from a report, a U.S. report on the issue that the government is in fact connected between the Mexican government and tied to the cartels, and that many Mexicans are saying it. Reporters are saying it. Folks on Televisa to every other little small paper have been screaming it. And these people want to deny reality. So, she did not say all Mexicans are cartel.
Yeah.
That's a distortion. That's a false accusation.
Mhm.
That's the true misinformation in this whole thing. But yeah, that's where we stand.
Yeah, and to that point, Daniel, what I find very concerning about the entire situation is what I believe these folks are doing is that they are taking someone who is on the right
Yeah,
side of the scale, on the conservative side of the paradigm, and because they don't like her, they're taking this clip, again, manipulating it and trying to use to paint her as bad. And by doing that, they're almost defending or
that's
saying
right.
there's not a reality in Mexico
Part of
that's
the
going
cover
on.
up.
Like, I would think someone who cares about the people of Mexico, someone who cares about the government of Mexico, someone who cares about US Mexican relations, someone who cares about Latin America, because so many people also something about the cartel that I've learned recently, and not even that recently, it's been for the last few years, but I want to say in the 90s and early 2000s, a lot of the human trafficking, la gente que venía, that would come into the US unlawfully, were not really by cartels. It was kind of these coyotes. It was almost its separate industry. But now the cartels, who are, gang members, I mean, who are beyond that, is a level of evilness. They have become the folks. For them, this is a business. Matter of fact, in McAllen, we were
Right.
talking to Border Patrol. They were saying that the coyotes really saw, their job sort of almost as something sophisticated. They cared about the end goal of the person, about their reputation. The cartels, they say now, do not care. They see the humans as product. Matter of fact, they use them. They talked about how they use them as distractions. They'll leave people abandoned in the desert so that Border Patrol has to go to that area so that they can then sneak in drugs through a
Yeah.
different
Right.
area. It's a sophisticated, unfortunate situation that these cartels have. And to think that there is nothing, no bribing, nothing illegal going on related to payoffs or anything related to the government, I think it's a level of turning a blind eye. But also, again, going to the main point here, all this is a reality, and trying to distract from that reality by trying to use this individual, Myrka Dellanos, for them as a focal point, to me, it is manipulation from the left, and I think it's also irresponsible for the left. How do you see it?
Well, yeah, it is, of course, the practice of character assassination, right? The to distort what her expression was in order to win your point of view and to demonize her, and undermine, her positioning as a credible voice, as an advocate for the Latino community. I mean, Myrka was with us on the Capitol Hill steps, when we were pushing dreamer legislation. I mean, she's been a champion, for immigrants almost her entire life. I know I've been on several occasions with her in her news shows to talk about, what the progress has been on immigration reform. And so people, to make these kind of false accusations in a very real way are also shooting themselves in the foot, Wadi. But a lot of these folks are doing it to protect, their personalities on the center left. I mean, Sheinbaum, we know, is a socialist leaning, elected leader. Again, she's the queen of the Western Hemisphere, and she's loved by the, by a lot of the Mexicans. I mean, she has a high popularity polling that just came out. It's like 80% of Mexicans love her.
Mhm.
Especially the poor, right? Because of her redistribution programs that she has, and so she's very popular, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And anything negative that is said against her, well, you're gonna get a blowback, right? And so they seek to undermine anyone who may have something negative to say about Sheinbaum's administration, or even the previous administration, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, also referred to as AMLO, right? And so they'll even go to the lengths of distorting what the any person has said, again, to make them look bad in front of the public. But the truth is the truth, and the truth has to be said, right? And so, which is exactly what Myrka did. I stand by every word that she said. In fact, I've repeated the same things on different platforms myself. But there's no question that there are other forces at play here that, like as you said, ironically, are actually almost justifying the actions of the cartel, ignoring totally that how violent they are, and that they would cut you in a split second if it was in their interest for profit.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. 2 points there that I heard, Daniel. Two key points of many things that you mentioned is one, it's character assassination of someone who's trying to bring light to a reality. And two, almost by attacking her, it's almost a defense of what we see on behalf of these cartels, both very negative thing. It reminds me that we typically say and we believe that a lot of the polarization comes because people are more focused on criticizing people than policy. If these folks wanted to have a debate on policy and say, hey, this is what we see from the cartel, they're actually not doing this, or the government of Mexico is not engaging in this type, which there's decades of evidence of this. This is not just a Sheinbaum thing. This is not just probably the left or the right. I mean, there's decades of evidence of different parties, which in Mexico, there's multiple parties similar to other places in Latin America. So it's a topic we'll continue to monitor, and we encourage folks to do their research.
Let me just add really quick here, Wadi. Yes, she is receiving blowback. Yes, there are even letters that are being written to get her off the show. And I would exhort the folks at Telemundo to have a steely spine on this one and defend, their personality. She's a talent, and she's just stating the truth is what she's doing. I would hope that there are no executive actions taken against her by the folks at Telemundo. I trust that they will not. Like I said, I stand by every word she said.
Yeah, very much so. Daniel, moving on to our next topic, we're also going to be talking about Venezuela. Since the beginning of this administration, there's been a big back and forth in the sense, and many, sometimes in a good way, in the sense that the White House administration was able to get a couple of detainees that were in Venezuela a win early on for the United States. Also, the Chevron contract essentially was, if I'm not mistaken, terminated might be the right word, or not allowed to be continued. We've heard strong remarks coming from Secretary of State Marco Rubio in this. There's a fascinating story of how a lot of the South Florida members of Congress, Mario Diaz-Balart, Maria Salazar, Carlos Jimenez, kind of really came in and talked to the administration about the dangers in this space. As of most recently, something that was dominating the news was the fact that Venezuela said, we're not taking any of our citizens. We're not taking any of the folks that you're trying to deport. They were not happy with the latest actions of this administration, but just in the last 24 hours have announced that they will be taking some of those folks back. What's your analysis on these ongoing situation?
Yeah. Richard Grinnell just gave an update that the Maduro regime has once again accepted to take flights, plane loads of their citizens who are being expelled or deported from the U.S. For their criminal activity tied to illegal entry into the U.S. And this was almost predictable, Wadi. I know I had was asked about this on Fox Noticias in one of the segments that I was involved in, and I predicted as much. I thought that Maduro was just fronting, trying to save face, but that eventually, I think what weighed heavy against Maduro in this case, and you're right. Let me just sort of take a step back, and then I'll answer the question. But you're right. This did start with Trump revoking the U.S. permit for Chevron to pump and export Venezuelan oil. That got the blood boiling on the Maduro side and the regime, because of course it strikes at their lifeblood, right? That's the money that's coming in that is sustaining the Maduro regime. is that their oil, and they're awash in oil, and so it just makes sense, right? And so part of the temporary solution was that we were also striking a deal with Bukele's, or El Salvador's Bukele, and also flying folks temporarily to Guantanamo Bay to hold them, right, as temporary detention centers of Venezuelans. Meanwhile, the threats that were being exerted by the Trump administration, because he still has a lot of leeway for punitive actions against Maduro, and which is why I kind of made the prediction that he would ultimately bend, right? And that was that they could still further distance diplomatic relations and extend the visa list of blocked officials, from any kind of visas, prohibit investments and money transfers to and from the U.S. to Venezuela, banking and financing sanctions, could also deepen and worsen to the point where they could coordinate with our international partners and further isolate Maduro economically and diplomatically, right? And then also limit tourism flights to and from Venezuela, right? So all these punitive actions were being considered, were also threats. And so guess what? What the heck? Let's just take back our folks. It's like so it was announced by Richard Grenell, and it's like, again, it's just, if you are the most powerful country in the world, well, why not exert that might to do good, right? And maybe even force regime change, which I think would be the optimum situation, obviously. But this had also, even before Chevron, I'll say that they did not honor the commitment to a democratic election.
Yeah.
Maduro was throttled in the public election that they had. And of course, they accused the opposition of electoral shenanigans. Go figure. I mean, he lost by over 70% of the public vote. So this was a slap in the face to Maduro. They rejected the election outcomes, which led to the Chevron decision, which of course led now to all these other threats and sanctions on the deportation.
Yeah, what's sad, and it kind of on bigger picture on this, is that, anyone who knows the history of Venezuela, decades ago, it was one of the countries where actually other people from Latin America would immigrate to go work in Venezuela. It was probably the #1 economy in
That's right.
that region. I mean, thriving. I mean, just again, the people would go. They wouldn't come to places like the United States. They would go to Venezuela, to their neighbors. I have friends who are from Ecuador, from Peru, who say like, yeah, we would go to Venezuela because there was work. I mean, it's a country rich in resources, high population, great individuals, great people. There's a desire from those individuals, especially from the youth. If you look in recent reports, the youth hears of this Venezuela that they don't know. And the one that they do know is one where their vote doesn't count, where the media isn't free. There isn't freedom of speech. If you protest, there's reports of people just disappearing, right? We understand the role of sort of the army force that Maduro has. What I also find fascinating, going back to the core of this topic, is if you're keeping track, these presidents like in Colombia, who tried to go toe to toe with Trump, it didn't work. To a certain point, Sheinbaum, who has been taking, I think, a more strategic and diplomatic approach, right? I think she's had some wins, but has also caved in a lot of areas. The same thing, Canada. I think it was just this week where they started imposing some tariffs, and Trump said, we're not going to play this game. We're increasing them by 50% then. And in a matter of 13 hours, they're like, okay, you know what? We take it back. We'll take our increase in tariffs back. And Trump said, okay, I'll get rid of my 50%. Same thing with Maduro. I mean, I'm not sure what he believed was the long game. I almost feel that caving from the beginning and almost saying a narrative of like, hey, we're in talks with them, so we're going to give them this win because we're playing the long game here. But when you try to stand strong against the administration, against the United States, you're finding yourself sometimes as short as 13 hours like Canada, and a couple of days or possible weeks if you're someone like Colombia and Venezuela. It's not working out for them. I think folks have to kind of catch on and understand that this is not going in the direction that they think. We'll see how
Not at
this
all,
plays out
especially
in some
when
of these countries.
you're so dependent on the American economy and American consumers, to sell your products and to, of course, create economic opportunities for your industries and your manufacturers and the companies that you have across, the countries of Mexico and both Canada. I mean, the economy of California is bigger than both Canada
Yeah.
and the US and Mexico. So, I mean, again, I go back to that, right? Is if you have this economic might, if you are the power of the world, it's not like Trump is being unfair and wanting to impose higher tariffs on a country while they, would impose a lesser rate. He's just asking for, one for one or zero
Yeah.
for zero is what he's doing. And so, yeah, let's leverage our might to make that happen. Sure, why not?
Yeah, and in the case of Colombia, Venezuela is saying taking back your citizens, right? It's like you said, it's not an unfair
Exactly.
approach. Yeah, it's kind of simple in this way. And I don't remember exactly. It might have been Secretary Rubio, or it might have been another White House official who said that the desire is also for Latin America to grow. If there is economic growth in Latin America thrives, and people don't have that push factor where they have to come to the United States. This is from the administration in the US in general. I would say it's not this approach of like, let's hold you down. These
Right.
tariffs are so you don't grow and to create economic barriers. If anything, it's so we can get to a place where there's better trade, where there's where there's a growing economy in your area. So the influx of migrants don't have to come into our space. So there is this desire of like, let's build the Americas, let's strengthen the Americas in that space. So I think this is a story we'll continue to see with Venezuela, with Colombia, and with various other countries across the Americas in relation to the United States. But Daniel, one of the last topics that we have here is the Department of Education. To be clear, the reports are not that the Department of Education is being eliminated. It's also the report isn't that everything within the department is being eliminated. Some things are being moved over to the Department of Health and Human Services, but there is a lot of people that are expressing what they believe are concerns, not trying to understand. I think all of us can say we value education. We can all say we value, the United States as a place where we can grow in our education. What's the reality? Do you see this as a good thing? Do you have any concerns? What's your take?
Yeah, well, this is a case of making government much more efficient, taking out the middleman from a lot of the decision making. I mean, look, the responsibility of educating our children belongs to the states. It is not enumerated in the Constitution for the federal government. Therefore, it's a federalist issue, right? And it reverts back to the states. For the longest time now, they created the Department of Education to try to complement a lot of the efforts of what the states were doing by giving them more resources, giving them more guidance, let's say, on the education of our children. But even that department started to get bloated, started to regulate way too much, started to condition a lot of the money that was being sent to the state departments of education. And so basically what the Republicans were saying was like, this is an attack on education. This is to rein in the bureaucracy, to lessen those regulatory conditions, that they place on the states, so that the states are more nimble, so that the states have more money. Because if you reduce the federal bureaucracy, then you have more money to give to the states, and so there's actually more money and more resources going to the states, who get to decide the kind of education that they want for their children in that state. That's what it is, right? But of course, those on the center left are trying to make it a political hit against Donald Trump, and seem to care more about the bureaucrats and the system than they care about, the outcomes. The one thing that is true, Wadi, is that we spend more on every child for their education in the public school system than anybody in the entire world. Yet we rank like 40th or 50th or something like that, when it comes to outcomes, the math and reading and writing. That is unacceptable. It has nothing to do with the money, but it has everything to do with a faulty system, with the kind of system that we have in place that is not working for us. It is top heavy, it is too bureaucratic, and they don't have the children's educational outcomes in mind. And so that's the intent here. Bravo. I'm all for it. And so let's do more of this.
Yeah, I hear you on that, Daniel. What you're saying is they're eliminating bureaucracy, not eliminating education. I think
Right.
if someone has concerns in this space and you really care about education, if anything, you should be able to see benefits if you really look at the issue, right? So think about where school legislation and policy is really created. It's really at the local level. And now,
That's right.
if you're a parent, many times a lot of these policies like education savings accounts, right, which are accounts that allow parents to put money into tax-free that you can then use for your kids, everything from like school supplies to tutors to sending them to a private school, all of the above. I mean, it is tax-free dollars that you then get to use as a parent. These kind of votes happen at the local level. You get to
Yes.
vote on this as a parent, sometimes in your election, or sometimes it passes through the legislator. But who gets to go up to the Department of Education and vote as a parent and say, this is what I desire for my kids? I mean, I get it. There's a long route of legislation having to go through Congress, through the House, through the Senate. Then it has to be signed into law. Then it has to be implemented. Then there's a bunch of executive orders that can help it or decrease it. Then there's the bureaucrats that actually have to go out and implement this or not.
Yeah.
And if you're
Up
a
already.
parent, you're a parent, you want this at the local level. You want to be able to vote for your school board members if
Yes.
you can. You want to be able to vote on these kind of amendments, and you want to be able to see what your state legislator does. In my opinion, what this is going to do, it's going to empower it. It's going to put even a higher weight of responsibility in the states. And I think as a parent, that's what you want to see coming out of this place and out of these type of cuts.
Yeah, that's right. And which is why we're so strong on school choice too, Wadi, because it's not just about improving the public education, but let's allow parents to have options, right? Look, not all schools are failing. Some are doing a very good job of educating children. There are incredible teachers across the country in the public school system, but not all of them are getting good outcomes or succeeding, right? And so we should be able to give a parent that power to choose for their child the kind of education that best fits their unique needs. I always sort of chuckle, when I see these well-to-do, wealthy, or these union bosses, when they testify and they'll rail against, a school choice because apparently private schools don't improve the test scores of a child. And then they say, well, where'd you go to school? Private school.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, so let me get this straight. You spent thousands on private school because it didn't educate you well? No, it did, right? And it does improve test scores. And we know that a private school is more nimble and they're better able to accommodate for the unique needs of a child. And so that's all we're saying. They just want the same opportunity for their child. But it's like what they don't want is to have the same public school setting in their private schools. Well, guess what? These folks, I think they are incentivized in different ways to make sure that the child succeeds. And right now, I don't see that in the public school system. I will say this, though, about school choice and how it impacts the public schools. Whenever there's competition anywhere in the marketplace, the competition always seeks to improve their product or their service, right? And so when you have educational vouchers, school choice issues, charter schools, public schools tend to up their game. I know the Dallas school system, for example, they do vocational training, early college classes. They have night school. They have career placement. Where they actually send the child, to actually be in a setting of a work setting of their choosing. It's all these programs now that are being made available, and it gives the child a richer option, for their education, and it engages them and they interact better. All that because there's competition. So bring it on.
Yeah, 100%. I think the left is also going to find a little bit of trouble because a lot of their base is in inner cities, major cities, and something these major cities like New York, like Miami, like Chicago, like Washington, D.C., is they see the benefits of charter schools. of options. We're not saying you have to do a charter school. We're not saying you have to do homeschooling. You have to do private school. You have to do public. What we're saying is choice allows parents to say, this is what I think is best for my child. And sometimes it might be different. One child might go to a charter school. The other one might go to a public school who has a good tech program. It's very possible. Having the choices to do that is what we're saying. Well, Daniel, this has been our episode. We cover various topics here. We encourage people to subscribe to our YouTube. We're on X, Instagram, and TikTok to stay connected. But that has been Garza, Gaitan, and the game. Thank you for tuning in.
All right.